I came across this, and I know we've talked about this before, because the whole idea of vaccination, ever since, of course, the pandemic and followed from it, has resonated around the idea of people choosing not to vaccinate perhaps themselves. But now the issue is vaccination for children. Parents making that choice not to vaccinate for children is very much back in the news, and it's a problem, or at least a concern, because Canada is not immune. Rates are slipping around the world. I wanted to talk to our friend, Dr. Chris Labos, about this. He's a cardiologist with a degree in epidemiology. You can hear him, of course, here at CJAD, weekends rather, with Joanne Vrakas at 7:20 on Sunday. Chris, let me start with this idea, and I know, at least I'm guessing, this may have something to do with the fact that, we now have a measles outbreak and have had it not just, parts of Canada, but in the U.S. as well. Do we blame vaccination rates going down on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the only reason why we're seeing a resurgence of measles right now is because of flagging vaccination rates. Remember, we eliminated measles in this country in the year 2000. So, if we had high vaccination rates above 95% is the usual threshold that we talk about. If our vaccination rates were above that, there would be no measles resurgence. But when vaccination rates drop below that and, somebody introduces measles into a community, that's when it spreads. And that's why we're seeing the outbreak that we're seeing now. And you're right, it's not just a Canadian thing. It's actually a global phenomenon across the U.S. and even in Europe. Cases have been really, really bad. And this is all a direct consequence of, flagging vaccination.
Look, I mean, I mentioned the pandemic because I think that was sort of what changed the game for a lot of people, right? It's fair to say it had an outsized impact for some people. But now, I mean, that's 4 or 5 years in the rearview mirror. When you meet people and they have a hesitancy, what do they express as the reason for it?
For measles in particular, a lot of the problem is that people just haven't seen it, right? So first of all, even before the pandemic, there was some flagging, there was some decreasing in vaccination coverage because of, this idea that the measles vaccine was linked to autism. It isn't. The measles vaccine in particular was a favorite of the anti-vaccine community. So because of all the repeated negative press, people were becoming a little bit more hesitant about measles vaccination. And this was happening, for the past 10, 15 years. The pandemic obviously made it worse, and it made it worse for a variety of reasons. The big one being is that a lot of people just couldn't get access to the medical system. And this is true not just in Canada and the U.S., but globally, right? We talk about, having a disruption to the healthcare system here in Canada. We forget that in many parts of the world, COVID was an unmitigated disaster, and it led to the collapse of the healthcare system. So a lot of people just lost medical coverage altogether. So there was sort of this underlying anti-vaccine rhetoric that was going on. COVID had, like you said, an outsized impact. And then the residual of that is that a lot of people just haven't caught up yet. And if you want the case in point, with measles vaccine, it's a 2-dose vaccine, right? A percentage of people got their first doses, and a much lower percentage got their second doses. Like first dose coverage is something like 92%, which is pretty good, but not perfect. But then second dose coverage only falls off to like 70-something percent. So you have a lot of people who are getting their first dose, which is usually given in infancy, and then they forget to go back for their second dose. And so that lost follow-up, the fact that many people don't have a regular doctor that is just keeping track of these sorts of things, means that a lot of people just get lost. They sort of, they fall through the cracks.
I would ask, if I could, I'm not sure it's a fair question. So there will be people, and I saw a story where a couple with their child talking to a doctor because they were hesitant to get a measles vaccine or a vaccine for their child. And the doctor had to spend some time explaining, why. Mm-hmm. And then at the end of it all, they said, okay, now that we have that information, we're ready to go ahead. Because all the information they had up until then came from, hearsay, social media, et cetera. How do you deal with a case like that when you have someone who confronts you with that?
It takes patience, and some people are just not willing to be convinced, and you can usually get a pretty good read on somebody. I have people who come in and they were like, I will never accept this. This happens to me often with cholesterol medication, which is another source of weird sort of pseudoscience. People are like, I will never take cholesterol medication under any circumstance. And there's almost no point arguing with somebody like that, and so you have to know when to cut your losses. But a lot of people do just want information, and so if you can invest 10 minutes, 15 minutes, to allay somebody's concerns, you can actually change somebody's mind. The problem is it takes time and it takes patience. And as the healthcare system, continues to fray at the edges, You just don't have doctors
Yeah.
that can devote that kind of time anymore. And everybody's becoming more overworked. Everybody's becoming more impatient. Everybody's becoming a little bit meaner and a little bit more rushed. And you're getting the concept of empathy fatigue, where people are just too tired and too overworked to actually invest the time to care. And that's a problem, because if we lived in a magical world where everybody had their own doctor and you could go to your doctor when you had a question, I think a lot of people would be like, you know what, I'm hearing a lot of crazy stuff online. I'm going to go ask my doctor what he or she thinks. You would have much less of this, because you would go and you would talk to your trusted healthcare provider. It's just that for a lot of people, you don't have that point of contact anymore. And that's where I think a lot of this, in that vacuum, that's where social media and Twitter and all the other stuff sort of is able to flourish, because there is a vacuum of good information out there.
We will leave it at that. Chris, always appreciate the time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Take
Dr.
care.
Chris Labos on this whole idea of hesitancy as far as vaccinations for kids are concerned. By the way, I'm reading that in Ontario, more measles cases than anywhere in the U.S. in Ontario.